And we're here at the site of Cold Spring School, and we have again with us Mr. Pat Stovall and also Ms. Lorene Searcy. And we want y'all to tell us a little bit about where the school was located on this site. Tell us a little bit about where the play area was, the direction that you got water, the direction that you even went and used the privy.
Okay.
We want to get a full roundabout knowledge of how things were during your school years
Life
here.
at school days.
Right.
Lorraine, you want to start?
Well, you know more about, you was here long.
Well, I'll go back to the beginning where I
Okay.
started in here.
First, tell us where the school was.
Almost immediate to my right. And
Okay.
the front door of the school faced the west, and the side door faced the south.
Okay.
These two trees were standing, of course, when the school was here, and probably were standing during the Civil War. Five of them. And
And the spring is which direction now?
spring is back in that direction.
Okay, back this
And
direction.
we get the water bucket and go down grade again across the ditch right up to the spring where we saw the cows wading in the water. That spring was dammed up at the time the waterworks put in force on the front supply of the water. They forced right up to the pumping station. And there were other springs in that area. One was called the Blowing Spring and had a hole cut across the side of the hill facing on the spring. This was all wooded back behind the school here. And places we had to play if we wanted to chase the fox or something back in there or hide and seek. We just hide behind the tree. And to the right over here, from that big oak there, was another one stood about parallel with it down this way, and that was our ball field between the two trees.
So then the trees in essence were the base area.
That's right. We played town ball. We didn't play baseball. I don't know if you're familiar with town ball.
And in all honesty, not. But
Well, you take a plank bat and a string ball, and you hit the ball, and you try to run to the base of somebody across and shoot out. Throw the ball across the pitch. That's the difference. There was just one base. You had to go there and hit it back again.
where was the marble yard?
So,
The marble yard, where you played marbles.
well, I'd say maybe right along here where we're standing. Different locations, of course, but anywhere the ground was level, you could do it. And then at lunchtime during the fall, early winter, we had that habit of going up the hill here to Stinson Woods, and it was covered with chestnut trees then, and we'd fill our pockets up with chestnuts and take them home. I recall one time that I had to carry some chestnuts home. I had a flour sack full of chestnuts, and that's the chestnuts. Unfortunately, the chestnuts are all dead now.
I'd say because the blight obviously
Yes,
literally wiped out the chestnut
wiped out the
trees
chestnuts.
many years ago.
All kinds of wild things grew around here that you could eat. Go out and pick up pickernuts and walnuts. Hazelnut bushes were all down there. I don't know whether there was a hazelnut bush or not. I don't think there are, but I don't know where there are any hazelnut bushes now. And all kinds of fruits, wild grapes, that sort of thing.
One thing I would like for you to tell us about is from this area, where did you live and how did you get here in order to go to school?
I lived Lake Grove, in the Fort Worth, I think it's called now, about a mile and a half east of here.
And Miss Lorene, where did you live and how did you get to
I
school
lived
here?
at the Rifle House, the old one, and there across the field. And we walked through the wagon trail. We could walk through.
Just had a pass to get
Yeah.
here.
Yeah, uphill, downhill a little while. It was a good walking area.
Well, Miss Stovall told us a little bit about where the boys played games to that area and also marbles in this area. Where did the girls play?
Well, they
But where in the
Yeah,
area did you play
well,
also?
over in, around the building,
Okay.
close to the building.
Okay. Now the boys had to go. Obviously,
Yeah, they
when
went in the woods.
they went in the
We
woods,
went
when
over the hill.
over the hill, and they had to go. Where did and the girls?
Yeah, they're over in there.
You had a little outhouse or
Little shack
little
there.
shack.
Yeah.
Well, is there anything? I mean, by being here, is there anything that you really? I mean, as far as bringing back a recollection, a memory of your school days here.
Well, I remember the ditch down there had a plank bridge over it when I went to school, and it seems to have been filled in now and about to wash away again. So, but as I said, these two big trees, and I recall every boy carried a slingshot and get out here and try to knock the woodpecker out of the top of these trees, slingshot. And if enough of us fired, well, I'd like shooting a shotgun up there and hit him once in a while.
You didn't have a chance if you had several.
No, not if it was a good shot.
What about? Okay, we need to point out one thing. This land where Cold Springs is located, or was located, is now the farm of Bill and Henry McLaughlin. At the time that the school was here, and even earlier, it was in the possession of the basketball family. I want you to tell us about some of the people that lived around here, and some of the schoolmates or the children that attended school along with you.
Well, Wilson Brown still lived down. They lived down there in that house. They was living in that road.
Okay.
He was down there. There was several of them gone. Jenkins.
They lived in
They
what?
lived over back in there towards the Stimson place.
Okay.
Robert Jenkins.
Okay.
There was a house right up here in the corner that was right on the line between the basketball land and McDowell. The family named Andrew lived there at one time. They had two sons. And then his love lived there. He had about 10 children, I think, and they all went to school together. Maynard's Club, you probably know.
Yeah, I think his name is actually carved on the building.
Probably not all his brothers, most brothers. They all went to school here. Yeah, basketball children went to school here, and Ellis Boo lived up there just across where Bill McLaughlin lived now. He had 3 sons and a daughter, and they went to school. I lived about a mile and a half across here, and Benny Harden and Elma Harden, and Talmadge Briley lived back in this direction. That's before the Crossroads School was built. He came here, Melvin Turner came here, Baylor Denton, and came at the time I was here, and Howard McDowell, and his sister Georgie Quigley. Quite a group. And that was a pretty good musical service. After 65, 70 years, they lose track of the
Obviously, there's been quite a bit of time passed, even since we don't actually know when the school was actually moved from this site over to the farm. There was, well, even maybe while it was still here, was used as a tenant.
Yes,
the house.
Thomas Stewart, his family lived right here in the school building. This lady back here, I don't know what year it was. She and her husband up there other place. So it was, it's been since 1962 because I'm living in the same place as it is now. The school was moved after that time.
So, well, that's good to know that we can actually have an approximate, you know.
That's from the time it was moved over to Holland. I'd say maybe 35 years from the time. Right. That is
I think we need to talk maybe a little bit more about Miss Lorraine, about where you played games and some of the things that involved the girls.
It was in December. I finished 8th grade. Went to school
talking now specifically
Yeah.
about when you were here as a student.
And I had brothers and sisters that came here too. But we had to walk through the wagon trail. Some of them were across from where Bill is, which granddaddy owned that house. And later on, they torn down. Bill was in it.
Yeah, let's just break off now. We'll break a little while. I think that's, he's still shooting, but we're going to break a while. He's not paying attention.
I'm ready to break it.
Okay, we have with us Maxine Briley. And Ms. Briley, you lived in the old schoolhouse when it was used as a residence. So could you tell us a little bit about when that was and a little bit about your years while living there and about your family too? Okay, that was obviously, as you said, during World War II, 42 and 43, and that maneuvers were ongoing in this area. You probably got a pretty good education about war strategy during those times. Tell us a little bit about what were the maneuvers, or what did they involve here?
I don't remember. I just remember going over to the wagon,
Now, where we are right now is where the school was originally located. Of course, when you lived there, it was not at this particular site. Could you tell us about where that was? In other words, where Mr. Hersham was life and lived, how close was the house to that school?
Well, if it hadn't been, long trees in between it, it's inside. I go up and have lunch with a lot. A lot of trees. That wagon, like wagon.
Is there something in particular that you remember about living there? Just a fond memory, or even even a sad memory, or just any recollection that you have about your days there?
We had to have a bed in the kitchen. We walked court. It was far then now.
Yes, now it would be quite an undertaking to walk that distance now, but no one thought anything about it at that point in time.
So I called my oldest brother and I want him to know because I was he was remembered up on there and all about the strawberries. There was another house.
Who lived there?
right there.
I know he came in Riley Marion as a logger, I believe. I believe he was, because I know he lived as a tenant farmer too, but I believe also he did logging. And I think he lived not, when he died, he was living not too far from where I live now. Well, I appreciate it. Is there anything that, because obviously there's something I might have failed to ask you, and if there's something that you'd like to share with us, I would love for you to tell anything that you can recall about it.
I was thinking of it. I was made this week, his house, it was one of the ones and she was bringing home the weekend. She came back out. Somebody came to me, they come back to them
And Sammy the Road. When they were heading toward your house when they were coming. Well, that's great. Well, I think let's fade us out.
Quit. 2 or 3 more springs. The water wasn't quite that muddy then. No, it was good clear water.
That's the one. Well, we're here at the spring. Very significant to the school because the school bears the name Cold Spring School, and
This
right,
is the Cold Spring.
and this is the Cold Spring. That's right.
Good clear stream of water coming out of the side of the hill. Muddy like this now with the cows.
Now, in relation to this spring, where was the flowing spring that you mentioned?
It's gone down all the way to
But this is the spring where you would come, or the other students that came to get the water. When you walk, there was a path. I'm sure that was from the school that sets about 300 yards or so from here, and then comes right down to the spring.
there. The more springs up through here that come out of the ground.
Well, is this the largest?
This is the largest. There is no spring. This is where the city pulls all the water system, where all the water came from. The pumping station is about 300 yards. The water main was dug by hand here into West Woodford.
That's amazing. That'd be a feat today that you couldn't.
Probably $1 a day. we would all eat there.
You see that red button?
Yes.
Wait, no, not wait till I get.
Settled.
Yeah,
And then push it in.
yeah,
That's all I have to do.
yeah,
Okay. Is that the same thing you turn it off with?
yeah. Well, you're already on for some reason. You're recording for some reason.
Okay, we're here at the site of Cold Springs, actually the spring of Cold Springs.
The spring of Cold.
Yeah,
We're fine.
we're fine. We're just having a little joke. We can cut this out. You can't do what?
Just turn it off.
Okay. Woo! Woo! That smells good. Got some fresh air. Well, we're here at Cold Springs. As a matter of fact, the reason why we're at this site right now, we want to talk a little bit about what was here 130 plus years ago when Camp Trousdale was located here. Have with me Tony Utley, and Tony and I'll, mostly Tony, be telling a little bit about what was here at the camp and about where it was situated, and a little bit about how long it was here and exactly what was involved while it was here. First of all, Tony, Camp Trousdale was named for Governor William Trousdale.
Right. Governor William Trousdale of Gallatin, lived in Gallatin. That what we all know as the Trousdale place, was actually retired at that time. He was home. He was in bad health with rheumatism, and he had retired. And they named Camp Trousdale after him in honor of him. First, we've got to go back a little farther to April of 1961 when South Carolina militia fired on Fort Sumter.
Except it was 1861.
What did I
You
say?
said 19.
Well,
That's all
I'm not
right.
good at
That's
dates,
all
so you'll
right.
have to correct.
That's all right.
1861.
Okay.
Okay, the South Carolina militia actually fired on Fort Sumter and actually defeated the federal forces there. And right after, they withdrew from the Union. The state of South Carolina actually succeeded. Well, in February of 1861, there was a national referendum to see if the states would succeed or would they stay in the Union. Well, Tennessee voted unanimously by popular vote to stay in with the Union, be a part of the Union. Until Abraham Lincoln sent letters, and Governor Isham B. Harris got a letter stated that he wanted the governor of Tennessee to supply something like 15,000 troops to help put down the rebellion in South Carolina. Of course, Governor Harris was totally against sending state troops to fight against their southern brothers. So he sent a rather hot letter back to Lincoln and said something to the effect 50,000 if need be to defend their heartland. Well, after this and the news about the letter had come out, there was another referendum which was later on, but at that particular time when the news came out that South Carolina had actually succeeded and the war had virtually started there, then people in Tennessee actually started forming militia companies, militia regiments. And the militia company was, as you know, Pat, was the backbone of the Army of the Interior. Each state was required by federal law to have a militia in each voting district, and they would meet once a year on a certain date, and they would march. And some of the fellows didn't even have guns, but would use tobacco sticks and things of this nature, and the lines would be crooked. And hence comes the term corn stalk militia, because the lines resembled a row of corn that was taken in a hand, playing in the hand. Well, the meeting place for the local militia in our area at Richland Station at that time was that place called Bradley's Inn, which was on South Russell.
I think Mr.
Street.
Ferguson called it the Bradley Hotel, but
Right.
the same structure.
Well, that was a meeting place for the militia, and of course this area, the voting precinct at that was the Osborne precinct, were actually meeting there with the militia. But when Fort Sumner failed, then there was one county in the state of Tennessee, which was Franklin County, actually wanted to succeed at that time and become a part of Alabama because Alabama had succeeded, and that was Franklin County. And they had formed a militia regiment called the 1st Tennessee, a fellow by the name of Peter Turney, and it was called Turney's Tennessee 1st. Well, the 2nd, and these units received designations by the time that they actually formed. And the second Tennessee Regiment, which was formed at Cascade Springs, consisting of local militia companies, was formed by William D. Bate, later Major General Bate, and later Governor. And at the bombardment of Sumter, the entire South, as we know, actually succeeded from the Union because of that. And probably if President Lincoln had not sent out such terse letters to the governor, especially of the South, asking for troops to put down the rebellion, it might have kept us from that terrible incident. But we don't know. That's history.
Tennessee, of course, was the last to secede, actually the first to rejoin the Union
Right.
after the war. Actually, returned by during the Reconstruction period. I mean, it was obviously by absentia had to go back into the Union, I suppose.
Well, in June, getting back, each state was responsible for setting up what we call council of instruction to train the militia companies that would be coming in. And since Richland Station was on a rail line, the L&N Railroad, and on the Kentucky line, because Kentucky, everyone knew would stay neutral, and there would be a lot of Kentuckians that would be coming south to join up. So naturally, it was a good location. So Camp Trousdale was established at Richland Station, right at the station.
And that was about February of 18?
No, this was a little later.
I mean,
May.
about May.
Right. The first troops started arriving in May.
I was kind of jumping the gun. I think actually.
I missed the date a while ago.
Well,
It was about 100 years.
I missed it by a few months. I think what was in my mind about February has more to do with the closing of the camp rather than the opening.
Well, by 1st of May, there were already regiments that were coming in to Richland Station. Count, I need the camera.
We'll have to safeguard the camera.
I guess we'll have to edit that by well, I mean,
that
$1,000 camera there.
Yeah,
I
I
can see
know
that
it,
sucker
yeah.
being flushed down the drain.
Literally.
About at the 1st of May, the 1st regiment started coming into Richland Station. The first three, there was the 8th Tennessee, the 16th Tennessee, and the 7th Tennessee, and probably the first 3 regiments. Well, these regiments consisted of approximately 1,000 men, 9 companies in support personnel with company designation. And they were, the captains of each company were elected by popular vote. Notwithstanding that the person probably had no military experience, was probably an eminent person in the community, a lawyer or held some position, and due to his popularity was elected a captain. And then the other officers were also elected. From those captains, then the captains got together and then they elected the colonel of the regiment. So the 8th and the 16th and the 2nd, 7th Tennessee Regiment were pretty early. And they were actually trained right there at the station. There was a big spring at the old Bradley Inn. But the camp was actually pretty close to the depot, which is at its original place. It's not there now, but its original as we know.
Probably, if anything, to the south of there.
Right.
Because the Bradley Hotel or Inn was on South Russell Street.
Pretty well near to, and I would say where Fred White's store, and the Portland Home Center, that area would be a part of Canton. It just sort of straddled the railroad. Well, of course, that small spring that was feeding the camp soon became overtaxed. And so men were actually leaving Richland Station with Camp Crowley and going to Drake Street, which is half a mile north of here, and washing their clothes. So during one of these trips to do their laundry, they wandered and explored this whole area here, and by local knowledge found that this wonderful place, which does not look anything like it was then.
But clearly, an adequate water supply.
Right.
And,
Plenty of woods.
Right. Just an
plenty of
ideal.
It was on the Baskerville farm at that time. So in June, I think about the 6th of June, maybe just a couple of days, but the 6th of June was when there was a state referendum to see Tennessee State Union. Well, they voted unanimously practically to see for the Union. This was on June 6th. And troops were already here in training, anticipating going to war against the war. So they actually succeeded. Then they become, once they succeeded, these regiments that were formed become part of the Provisional Army of Tennessee, not in the Confederacy, because they have not been sworn in to the Confederacy, because the Confederate Congress had not met. There was not really a Confederacy. There were just several states that had succeeded. So these were actually state groups. And so it became the responsibility of the state to set up the camps of instruction, which they normally call them, basic training camps. So they set up the camps of instruction, and they moved out here about the, let's say, 7th or 8th of June, 1861. And it was a rugged area. A lot of the diaries report back that they spent several days just cleaning out underbrush and scrub over these days. But the water supply was adequate at that time. But the problem is, I need to let you talk a little.
Well, maybe a little bit.
I'm dominating the conversation.
But they located here, and one thing I think we need to point out is the fact that as far as being armed, you mentioned just carrying tobacco sticks or just poles in training, but they were very limited initially.
Very few, right? There were very few weapons that were actually brought into the camp, because everyone that joined the army were anticipating in getting a new gun. Well, this didn't happen because the state did not have any weapons. There were 2 or 3 state armies scattered around the state, and even the weapons that were in the armies were in such bad repair they were practically useless, and most of them were the old 1812 flintlock musket. And but very few of the soldiers actually came to camp with any type of guns or equipment. There were a few shotguns. But one thing was impressed was a lot of homemade Bowie knives, big old homemade knives, which they refer to Bowie. Everyone had one stuck in their belt, and this was a statement of manhood. Everyone killed the Yankees. The clothes, several of the families that the people that had money actually came to camp in rather nondescript uniforms. There was no conscripted uniforms, so they were just a collage of different types of uniforms. But mostly the yeoman farmers had homemade dyed butternut jeans.
Probably as many as 6,000 had assembled here, maybe.
Right, at the height of this camp here, we think probably 6,000 or 7,000.
Now they had, we know where the school was positioned to the east of that, along the bluff there would have been where the ovens were likely positioned.
Right, we think that was the center of the camp by virtue of the schoolhouse being there, which was used originally as a hospital and not as a headquarters.
Not because people were injured, but because of sickness and other causes. Even the spring here had become contaminated, and that necessitated the school being utilized as a hospital, and then even eventually the camp had to be moved.
Right.
Now, as far as we know that William Polk Moore was the doctor who actually assisted the camp here.
Right.
At the
There were plenty. Surprisingly enough, at the start of the Civil War, there were each regiment were authorized one surgeon and one assistant surgeon, and there were a lot of doctors that actually applied to Governor Harris, and he said, "No," said, "we don't need. We've got all the doctors we need. You do better by serving the people at home." So nobody anticipated this 4 long, bloody years of struggle. But you were talking about the sickness. Actually, in 1861 May, there was actually a national epidemic of measles. Now, where this started, we really don't know, because it was predominant in the north and the south, and it could have been any of the port cities or whatever. And I think the first, even before the camp was moved from the railroad station to here, people were actually dying of measles. And this was all over nationally. It only wasn't a southern problem, it was a northern problem. It was happening in the northern states as well. And strange thing, the medicine then, we were still in archaic, in the dark ages. As a matter of fact, one of the doctors suggested that the men do not need to sleep on straw ticking, because that's what causes measles, the straw. I mean, a simple thing like that. But we think probably what it was, Pat, a lot of these boys never been anywhere. Grew up on the farm, never been to the city, and they got thrown together with a lot of other people that were immune to some of these things and were actually carriers. And that's what happened. And before long, maybe a quarter of this camp was sick. From measles and mumps, and as you mentioned a while ago, sinkhole over here about 50 yards between the school and the spring. They butcher the cattle, they throw their hides in there, their bones, the offal, anything.
and eventually that got
Contaminated.
right, got into the underground water.
Right.
Was this comes from the Manteca Spring originates here, and obviously the water.
It just carried it on down. There are several down this way. And the latrines, or at that time, during the Civil War, they were called sinks. And they had prescriptive sinks, 30 inches wide, 20 feet long, and you're supposed to straddle it, and there was a brush wall around it. But the men were so modest that they'd never been around anybody, so they were reluctant to even use these, so they would run in the woods or wait to go behind somebody's tent. And of course, this added to the contamination. But the residual of the sickness here in the summer was really not felt until the winter months, when the men were in such a depleted state of health that so many of them died at Bowling Green, and as a result of the battles around Fort Donelson, because of the weakened state.
Now, what time did they? I would estimate sometime probably in October, November is when they actually abandoned the site here, and when they went out to winter quarters, and winter barracks had been built out on the Veneta Road.
Right, that was, we think, probably in November. Of course, we know the first commander here was a general by the name of General Felix Gonzalez.
And he's like you and myself. He was nearsighted.
Right, myopic, I think is
Yeah.
the correct term.
Right.
But he was a editor of the Nashville Banner. He was a resident of Columbia, Tennessee, and a lawyer. The only military experience that Zollicoffer had, he had been a lieutenant during the Seminole Indian War in the early 1800s. But by being such a popular and eminent person, he was made a brigadier general. Very popular with his men, but totally inept. He tried to to do his best. And his headquarters, as you know, is that he stayed at Thomas Clinton House there,
Which is in the proximity
of
of
the first camp.
right, exactly. But also in the proximity to would be in the area of Maple Hill Cemetery.
Right. And General Zollicoffer tried to do a good job, and so many men had never been anywhere other than their home. So once they got out here, they used to, at night they'd sneak off and everything. So he would put guards around the camp, and it got so bad that he instructed his guards, don't let anybody out or in other than myself, General Zollicoffer. So the story is he approached the guard one night and he said, "Well, I'm through you, I'm General Zollicoffer." He said, "Don't give me that. He said, if I let you through, everybody and his brother, will be calling himself Zollicoffer." So the legend is he couldn't get out of camp. But there are records of having mock battles here and skirmishes here on the ground with very few weapons, sticks, rocks, whatever. That they would train. The days were hot and long. They would be up at 5 o'clock in the morning, and they would work all day, and sometimes Sunday. And this was great concern to some of the more those that did have religious feelings. There were some artillery units here. There was Rutledge Artillery that came in from Nashville. It was formerly Nashville, and it must have been a spectacular event when this artillery unit came in, because the artillery was the cream of the crop. I mean, these were the wealthy residents that actually paid for this whole unit itself. And everyone were dressed to a T, and they had the new cannon that were forged in the, so once they rolled in here, everybody just quit, to run over and watch the artillery.
As we would today.
But as new people would come in, there would be trained, I think it was about 6 weeks, and the 2nd regiment, once formed in Caspian Springs, was never here. It went directly to Virginia from Caspian Springs. And then the next two, I believe, was the 8th and the 16th, which went to West Virginia, which was actually West Virginia now, at the Battle of Cheat Mountain, and served under General Robert E. Lee, and was not commander of the Confederate forces. But things here during that summer, people come out from Nashville by the hundreds to see the camp. They grab jumping buggies,
In fact,
wagons.
I know I brought a letter from, there was a Stone from Castaigne Springs who wrote a letter of her intention to come just to visit.
Wrote it to Thomas McWhirter.
Right.
Thomas McWhirter, evidently, and he was in Captain Baskerville's company. Now, I don't know if it was related to the Baskervilles that owned the farm here, but he was in Captain Baskerville's company, and he invited the lady to come see him. She mentioned, or he had obviously mentioned the sickness that was here, and she mentioned that in turn. And as a postscript to that, Thomas McWhirter was wounded seriously in the Battle of Shiloh the next April and died as a result of his wound. And you wonder, did these people ever, was there more there than a platonic relationship? That's just one of the millions of stories,
Well, tell a little bit about General Felix K. Zollicoffer's demise. We mentioned he was nearsighted.
Well, he, once the Army started forming, he was given about 7 regiments and was given an impossible task of holding the line from Columbus, Kentucky to Mississippi, Cumberland Gap. And when he left, Robert Hatton, Colonel Robert Hatton, took over as commander of the camp, was a resident of Lebanon, a school teacher and lawyer, and he was the next commander. But General Zollicoffer with 20th Tennessee Infantry, which was trained here, and several other regiments, wound up at Mill Springs or Fishing Creek, Kentucky, and in a battle with the Union forces up there. And as you mentioned a while ago, he was nearsighted, and he ran out and was given an order to a Union colonel that he thought was one of his men. And these Union soldiers were just flabbergasted. They wondered what's going on. And then one of his men rode up behind him and shot at him, and then they just opened fire, and Zollicoffer was killed at that point and lay in the corner of a fence row, and supposedly the Yankees pulled tufts of hair out of his head to see ribs and such. General George Thomas came by and recognized him later at Rock and Chickamauga and treated the body with respect. He, along with a young lieutenant by the name of Bailey Peyton Jr., one of the more eminent families of Gallatin, his son, they lay in state at the Capitol. And of course, this was in November of '61, Pat, and that's about the time we think that the camp was moved. And sickness still prevailed at site. And there weren't any tents there. They were referred to as barracks. But now you and I know what a Civil War barrack was a log hut about 10 at the end with a mud chimney. And there were probably hundreds of them out there at that time.
Those provided winter quarters were
right. Each man built his own, take an axe and go out in the wood and get his own material and build his own.
And it was there probably until about November, until about February.
February, the Confederate forces had built Fort Donelson and Fort Henry on the Tennessee, and Fort Donelson on the Cumberland. And General Grant had attacked Fort Donelson and Fort Grant with superior numbers, far superior numbers. Fort Donelson held out, I think it was about 4 or 5 days. Fort Henry went real slow. And the Army fought and made a valiant stand. And they were surrendered. And there's always been controversy about they could have escaped, could have marched out. And of course, most historians, 150 years later, say, yeah, I could have done this, should have done this. So, hindsight's 20/20. Well, there were about 10 to 12,000 men that were surrendered at Fort Donelson. A lot of them that trained right here on this spot. And one of the outfits that were, in the significance of this, is one of the outfits that surrendered there was the 30th Tennessee Infantry Regiment, which actually trained at Tyree Springs and I think maybe Macon County. But there were a lot of local boys in that country. Ellis Harper was in that country. A lot of his friends. They were in the thick of the battle over there like the Crows, and they were so dispirited with the leadership that they saw that once they were exchanged later that spring in Vicksburg, Mississippi, they didn't go back. And Ellis Harper formed a guerrilla company, and that's another story.
Right, I know the story.
But I wanted to add that. But once Fort Donelson fell, in I think about the 14th of January, then the Confederate Army in Bowling Green that was under General Stephen Johnston went to evacuate Bowling Green. And once they did this, it left northern Tennessee and Sumner County open. And as they were evacuating, Camp Townsville III was burned with innumerable amount of stores, huts, buildings, all types of equipment, and a cloud of smoke could be seen from Gallatin of the equipment. So that was the inception of what, 9 months? I think
Right, about duration of approximately 9 months. In other words, from approximately May until February, from May of '61 until about February of '63.
quite a
I know there's some interesting things that have been said about the camp here. I know Mr. Ferguson mentioned in the Sumner County Civil War that one of the regimental band could only play two tunes, and one of them was The Girl I Left Behind Me and Bobtail Nag.
Yeah, that's true, but you have to realize that it said that each regiment had a regimental band, but that's true. But that was your first duty was that of being a combat soldier. Not you weren't drafted or didn't join the army to be in the band, and so that was secondary. And one mention, Pat, of the requirements to join the army when at first there were no requirements. You could 14 or 60 or whatever, and the quality of the health of a lot of the people that were in that. There was only one requirement, that you had all your teeth. You know what the importance of that was? That you could tear a paper cartridge. And that was one of the requirements to pass the physical that you had your teeth, your upper and lower front teeth. And you could, and there was no standards on anything else. And so a lot of men were in bad health to start with. But we are right here in the center of historical
Even
place, right?
right, it even goes far beyond significance to.
And you know, Pat, if you could just visualize, probably every tree of any size would probably cut out for fire. Tents would have been dotted, the woods, fields, and the main housing aspect was the shebang. It was just a brush arbor, from the Irish word shebang, called shebang, and that's the thing they went to with it. But there would have been literally hundreds of fires and a lot of noise, and you would have heard drums and people coming through spring, and down here you would have a man down here washing his dirty shirt. In 10 yards down, you'd have someone dipping up water for coffee. The sanitary conditions were nil. I mean, if the colonel or the commander of the regiment was a strict disciplinarian, he usually, his outfit usually did better as far as sickness. You can check the records and you can tell that a lot of sickness was restricted to certain regiments where there wasn't a lot of discipline.
Clearly, the problem was there was a lack of that discipline, and that was conducive to a lot of emergence of the contamination, especially now measles. Certainly an exception to that.
But the discipline, you mentioned the discipline. You've got to understand that we're talking about the Anglo-Saxon, Scotch-Irish, most independent, freedom-loving people in the world.
Oh, yeah, I'm part of that. Bull-headed as it comes.
They walked straight off of farms where they had lived an independent life. And boy, they didn't want nobody to tell them what to do. And they had to learn quick.
Well, it's interesting to note that not only was this Camp Trousdale, I know, but Ms. Briley, Miss Maxine cited that even maneuvers were held here almost 80 years later.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, different
World War II.
But you know, those of us, I had people here at Camp Trousdale, relatives, and so did you, and anyone that's...
I don't know, I think mine were...
on the northern side.
I don't know.
But anybody that family has been in this area for several years had several relatives here.
Sure.
So I guess a cousin my name, Thomas Brown, joined the 18th Tennessee Regiment and did his duty here, captured at Fort Donaldson, and exchanged at Vicksburg and went to work for just a kid. Joined because all his neighbors were joined. Now, he couldn't stay home.
Is there something that we have failed, or I shouldn't say we, that you have...
Yeah, thank you.
Right, that you...
You saying I dominated?
Well, that you have not cited, or that really needs to be mentioned regarding this...
The only thing that I can't emphasize enough, Pat, is that we are so jaded by our perception of what the Civil War soldier looked like. You see all these glorified paintings of natty dress and equipment, immaculate. Well, it was an army of rivals. I mean, they looked more like refugees than they did an army. And it was really a task for the officers to mold this group of men, which eventually became the greatest army in the free world. And European scholars have noted that for years, that the Confederate soldier became the greatest fighting force there was, and he was short on every commodity other than bravery.
It's just phenomenal how well the war, no doubt, the perception of the North was that this could just be, the South could be overtaken in approximately a month, or
Right.
certainly within 6 months.
Sure, and then the Southern soldier thought, well, gee, it'll take us about 3 weeks to whip these Yankees, because everybody knows one Southern boy can whip 10 Yankees.
But it drug on for 4
Sure,
years.
and the South was outnumbered, but you can't degrade the Northern soldiers. They were tough and resilient, and probably a third more of them died than the Southern soldiers, but they lasted it out. But the thing was, the young people, as they do in all wars, got caught up in the fervor of the moment. They knew nothing about nullification. They didn't know anything about states' right. Majority of them had never even seen a slave, much less own a slave. So, you know, it wasn't a thing about slavery. Though that was an issue, and a very important one, and thank God, you know, that issue was resolved. But there's not a historian alive today that's familiar with that period that will not tell you that situation would have been resolved within itself within a very few years, because it was slowly being resolved.
That's true.
But there were just so many forces from so many different directions and so many different people, and you had your pride, your honor, and those things always get you in trouble.
Well,
Have we talked too much?
well, I think I know my butt's getting somewhere.
Let me say.
Ah!